tonight, the message is called I Can't. Originally, the plan was to do a third week of mission. We've talked about this a lot. I so value the idea that we don't exist for ourselves. We exist for the campus. Once you've made a decision to follow Jesus, your responsibility is to go out and make disciples. And that's our vision. So we want to own that, this idea that we're not about ourselves. These four walls that we are in should not separate us from this world, from this campus. We believe that they're our mission field. But as I got further into the semester, I realized that there's something that God was dealing with me, but also continually, almost every day, I would have conversations with students, with family members and friends that were dealing with anxiety. They were dealing with worry. They were dealing with fear. They were dealing with depression. And so I felt like it was really important that we talk about this up front, because the truth is, life is going to get harder as we move into the semester, not easier. And so it's important that we know how to handle, what is the biblical response? How does God expect us to respond to stress, to worry, to anxiety? You know, a few weeks ago, back in the middle of August, you guys were coming back into Greenville. School was about to start. You were about to start classes, and Fuse was starting back up, and things were crazy busy, but it's always such an exciting time of the year. And because of the addition of football, especially this year, am I right? It's definitely my favorite time of year. This year was no different. Like, we saw hundreds of students that came into our doors for the first time in the first couple of weeks. More than 10 students committed their lives to Christ in the first couple of weeks. We have had dozens sign up for retreats and mission trips. We've had almost 200 students sign up to be involved with a small group. All those things, in short, was incredible. But it was also during a period of about 2 weeks towards the middle and end of August that I began to experience some other emotions. To give you guys some context, back in April, my wife and I, we had our second kid. Her name's Juliana. I've meant to put a picture on the screen. You have to follow me on social media to see her picture. But just a beautiful girl, love her to death. And I have an older son named Jameson, and he's like the model in the family because he looks so much better than I do. My wife is beautiful. That sounded horrible. Let's edit that out, Mike. All right. We're going to take that part out. And she didn't, my wife, because we had Juliana, she didn't have to go back to work until the middle of August. She had like a really good length of time off. And so when you have my wife at home and when I'm home and we have two kids, well, with Jameson, we're playing a zone defense, but it's 2-on-1, right? And then when my wife and I are both home with two kids even, it's not that bad. Juliana's a fairly easy kid. It was pretty easy to adjust. I got Jameson, she's got Juliana together, and we're doing it. And then my wife decided to go back to work. I don't know why. Evidently, she needed to make money, and which is the truth. But I had to switch to, instead of a 2-on-1 zone, now I'm playing 1-on-2. And if you guys haven't experienced this, most likely. But it was just another level of stress in my life. And at the same time, I decided that with college stuff coming back up, my life getting really busy, having to manage kids on my own for the first time since we had Juliana, I decided that there was no better time than to start seminary. So I decided to start taking a seminary class, which was just great, awesome timing. And that's the way I worked. But, you know, for my whole life, I figured that I've always done well with managing stress. I'm what many of you would consider a deep water fish. Like, the more pressure is on me, the better I performed. Like, low stress situations for me, like many of you, they result in low production. The less I have to do, the lazier I become. Well, with all this going on a few weeks ago, the water started to get really deep. Like, I began to feel like overwhelmed, but not just overwhelmed to the point where I was just frustrated, where I was just incredibly stressed. I was getting to a point where, to be completely transparent, there were moments where I just wanted to ball up in a ball. I wanted to sit in the corner. Moments where I just wanted to cry. Like, moments where I would literally be fighting back tears. I would watch Facebook videos with like puppies, and my eyes would like start sweating. I was like, what's going on here? I don't know what's under that. I got emotional, right? And for those of you that know me, you know that I'm not a crier. My wife would attest to this. I'll have the occasional eye sweat, but my wife really has only seen me cry once or twice in over 7 years, you know? The stress in my life was leading to this increased level of anxiety, really, that I've never really experienced. And I don't think it was like overly more stressful than it had been in the past, but I was experiencing it differently. I had this complete lack of peace. And now I feel a little vulnerable right now in this moment. And just to help me feel like I'm not alone, does anyone else here relate to that at some point? Yes, and if you look around, you see that we're not alone here. or not. I know a recent study, this is a crazy deal. A recent study was done of college students, and nearly 100% of college students report some degree of anxiety. And this level of anxiety, it causes many things. We have anxiety about school, and that's not just we're stressed out, but it leads us to do really stupid things, one of which is nearly 70% of college students admit that they've cheated at least once. Right? And the number one reason why college students cheat is not just because they're bad people, it's because they feel so much pressure that they can't do it without cheating. Maybe you've experienced that. We have anxiety about our relationships. You're worried about finding the right one or not finding someone, so you start to settle for anyone. You have anxiety about your schedule. You begin to say yes to all these commitments, and then what happens is you have to start letting people down. You start not showing up for the things that you say you're going to do, the things you're stop not being able to follow through. You know, a recent study performed by college pastor Josh Lilly showed that college students are the worst demographic of people when it comes to dependability and reliability. It's true. It's true. You guys, you know it. Partially because you don't have your parents making you do it. You know, you're free. You can be whatever you want. Also, I think anxiety plays a role in that, where you want to do so much. You guys want to be good people. You want to be connected here. You're worried about grad school, about jobs, and you say, I need to do as much as possible. So you say yes, yes, yes. What happens? You can't measure up. You can't do it all. And so you end up not following through. And then there's those of us in the room, and you're just messed up. Like, you start getting anxious about being anxious. Like, you're not experiencing anxiety, but then you think that you might be, and then you start worrying about being worried. You start to get depressed about potentially getting depressed or being depressed in the past, and it just starts to freak you out, right? You're stressed about next week's stress. We do it all the time, right? Well, the reason we need to talk about anxiety is not just because we want to be better people. The reason we need to talk about anxiety is because it's a gateway to other sin. We see in Luke chapter 8, it's not going to be in your worship guide, this parable of the sower. It's basically a sermon illustration, a story that Jesus used, and it was a story of this farmer who's planting seeds. Well, 3 of the seeds that he had, they fell on bad ground. One of them fell on the road, one fell on the rocks, and the other one fell in the thorns. And only one of the seeds fell on the good soil. Well, obviously, only the seed that fell on the good soil is going to survive, is going to thrive. But I want us to notice the reason behind the seed planted in the thorns. We're going to ignore the rock seed and the one that was on the road. We're just going to focus on the one in the thorns. Basically, Jesus tells this story, and the disciples are like, Jesus, we don't get it. And so he has to explain what it means, because, you know, you've all been there. You're in English class, and you read some poem, you're like, I have no idea what this is talking about. Other people are like, oh, that is so good, you know? And you're like, I have no idea. Basically, the disciples are really confused. And so Jesus, what's up? What are you talking about? Well, Jesus explains in Luke chapter 8, verse 14, what the seed and the thorns. You see it on the screen and on your worship guide and also in the Bible. Go figure. The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature. Basically, he's saying that the seed that fell among the thorns, it stands for those that hear. People that believe that Jesus did die for him, believe that Jesus lived a life that they couldn't live and died a death that they deserve, so that coming into a relationship and believing in him, they can have eternal life with him. They buy into it. They say, yes, I need him. And then what happens? They go out, and life's worries, riches, and pleasures grab them, and they pull them away from the truth of knowing Jesus. And what happens? They don't mature. They fall away. Anxiety is a huge deal because it'll strangle us. Worry in this life will choke you out of a relationship with Jesus. And how we handle anxiety, how we handle worry will also be a testament to the world around us about our relationship with Jesus. Think about it. It's important to understand that the world is watching you, how you handle the stress in your life. If followers of Jesus, those of us in this room, most of us in this room who profess Jesus as Lord, if we can't navigate stress and anxiety well, but claim that Jesus is the Prince of Peace, why would anyone else want to be a part of this deal, right? Statistically, people that are followers of Jesus experience no less anxiety than people that say that they aren't a follower of him. That's messed up. We've got to see a solution here. If Jesus is the Prince of Peace, meaning that basically the opposite of peace is anxiety. Peace means that no matter what happens in your life, you're good with it. It's this idea that Jesus and God's will for your life and his plan for your life is far better than even what you and I can imagine for ourselves. And we trust in it and to be at peace with that. So here's the question. How do we do that? Because we understand that we can't just tell ourselves, all right, don't be anxious today. I'm good. And we can't just walk out. It doesn't work that way. So there has to be some practical way. Well, thankfully, the Bible talks about it in Philippians chapter 4. It's this classic section on dealing with anxiety, with dealing with a worry. I think a lot of situations we can deal it with, those of you struggling with depression. And in this situation, in this section of scripture, we see that Paul is actually in prison, not exactly the most delightful situation. He's writing to the church in Philippi, and he says this. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Now what happens, they didn't get it the first time, so he says, I will say it again, and he even puts the exclamation mark. I don't know if it really had it then, but rejoice. This idea that you need to rejoice in the Lord, and saying it is so important that he says it twice. And think about the people that are reading this. They're like, man, I'm dealing with anxiety. I really don't have time. I'm stressed out. I don't have time to rejoice. I don't know if you've been there, where you're so worried about life that you can't focus in on rejoicing in him. Doesn't really make sense, Paul. Can you go on? He does, thankfully. In verse 5, he says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. This is where it really kicks in. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. We're going to start in verse 6. The first point is, don't suppress what you're dealing with. One of the points we talked about at the beginning of the semester is because we're all messed up from the floor up, there's no reason covering it up. And because almost 100% of us in this room at some point in our college career are going to deal with anxiety, I think it's time that we recognize that we're not alone and there's no reason in suppressing it. So don't suppress what you're dealing with. He says in verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but what does he say to do? In every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, what he says, present your requests to God. We have this saying that we'll say a lot, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. Even if we are currently experiencing a great deal of anxiety, we have all dealt with it in the past and we'll have to face it in the future. And the biggest mistake that people make is they just let it brew inside of us and we never let it out. We aren't called to suppress the stress, suppress the worry, suppress the anxiety we're dealing with, but instead, notice the first thing that we are instructed to do is not talk to our best friend or our roommate or our college pastor. The first step is to bring it to God. He says, present your requests to God. But some of you are like, well, Josh, here's the deal. Like, is that really going to work? Because I've vented to my friends and they ain't no help. And I've vented to this person and that person and they ain't help. What's the big deal? Does God really hear? Does he really answer? Ben Stewart says it this way. God is the only person who is strong enough to do something about it, loving enough to want to, and wise enough to know how. Listen, if you haven't really confessed, you haven't really released your anxiety on him, then why not give it a chance? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. I love the language here. He says, cast all your anxiety on him, which means that you're not just saying, here you go, Lord, here's my anxiety. It's like this idea where you're just throwing it in his face. You ever casted anything? I've casted a fishing rod, and I have an idea. I don't know about you. When I have a fishing rod, I'm a man. I'm trying to compete with the person beside me to see how far I can throw it, right? You've been there. You just try to launch the deal, and that's the way we're called to do with our anxiety, is cast it all on him. Throw it all on him. But how do we do that, right? What does that even look like? If I was going to tell you guys beforehand that tonight we're going to talk about prayer, a lot of you would probably be like, oh, okay, that's cool. Now I talk about anxiety and depression and worry. It's like, oh man, I got to be there for that one, right? Well, prayer, for some reason, we just have this ho-hum mentality when it comes to it. And I want to talk about the importance of prayer. You ask, can you pray anywhere, everywhere? Yes, you can. Can you pray anytime? Sure, you can. Are you supposed to pray without ceasing? Yes, I'm praying right now. It's awesome to know that prayer is a general term for communicating with God, right? But one of the issues I see in my life, maybe it's an issue that you see in your life, is because I have such a casual view of prayer, that recognizing that I can pray while driving, recognizing that I can pray while I'm watching a commercial, recognizing that I'm able to pray while walking from my car to campus, what happens is I begin to push aside the importance of this focused time with God. Just a couple really quick tips. They're not on your worship guide, but I want to encourage you to set aside some time to pray. I believe that 5 minutes of focused prayer is more valuable than 45 minutes of unfocused prayer. For those of you who say that you're too busy, the truth is you're not too busy. You just aren't managing your time well. And if you say that, man, I'm barely getting 6 hours of sleep, I have no time in the day, I'm stressed out to the max, the truth is you're doing some things that God doesn't want you to do, because committing to too many good things will prevent you from connecting to the best thing. The Bible talks about how God has given us enough time to do in the day to do everything that he's called us to do. So if you feel like you're not able to do things that your heart is drawing you to, that God is calling you to, the truth is it's time for you to let some of those lesser things go. So set aside some time to prayer. But also, this is a huge thing that every time I talk with a student, I get this vibe from them in a real conversation with them that they're not being real with their prayers. I would encourage you to be real with God when you're praying, and also get specific. Your translation in verse 6 where it says, but in every situation by prayer and petition, your translation might say by prayer and supplication. Supplication just literally means specific. Get specific with God. God can handle what you're going through. If you're getting more emotional with your friend or your counselor about your anxiety than when you begin to open up with God about what's going on in your life, then your view of God is far too narrow. If you're frustrated with him, just let him know about it. Maybe you have the right to be. Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling emotional? You can let it out. But notice also what's important in verse 6 is that in the middle of it is by prayer and supplication, communicate specifically to him, but it says with thanksgiving. All requests should be presented to God in thanksgiving. Why? Because to thank God ahead of time demonstrates that you're thankful no matter what the results are after the request. I don't know about you, but God doesn't always answer my prayers in the same way that I wish he would. And he most certainly doesn't answer them oftentimes in the timing that I wish he would. The truth is, when we have this spirit of thankfulness, we're saying, God, I recognize that your plan for my life is better than mine. And by thanking him is saying, Lord, I trust you no matter what, because your ways are better than my ways. In verse 7, I love the response of his. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding. Because a lot of times his answer isn't going to make sense to us. Will guard our hearts and mind. This idea that he's standing outside of our hearts. And by having the spirit of continual prayer, I'm not saying that praying one time, 5 minutes is going to remove all your anxiety, but having this mindset of every single day, laying your cares, casting your anxiety on him. If we get into this culture, this mindset of doing that, this habit of doing that, God's response is that he is going to guard our hearts from it. The second point is this: set your mind on what is true. We see in verse 8, he says, finally, my brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Meaning, don't focus on the crap that's going on in your life. Focus on the good things that God has promised you and that he's done in your life. Focus on the true things, the capital T, true things. You know, I've shared this before, but when Fuse was starting back in 2011, it's crazy. We're only like 3 weeks away from being 5 years old. I was filled with a lot of anxiety. And coming to campus at that time as a non-student, graduated 4 years before, trying to figure out room reservations, how to get recognized as a student org, on top of feeling really pretty much completely unqualified and working a part-time job at the same time, I was just really just stressed out. My mind was so focused on how to get everything going and started. But then there was a moment where God spoke to me as I left Mendenhall Student Center, when I could actually park out this way, when I could actually park right there. It was awesome. I don't know if you guys remember the good old days when you could park. It was a beautiful time in my life. And I remember leaving a meeting that didn't go well on campus, trying to figure out, we're trying to start a ministry. In case you're wondering, having a place to meet is fairly important, right? And so it didn't really go the way we had planned, the way I'd hoped. And so I wanted Hendrix. No, I didn't. I just wanted a room. I just wanted to give me a room for 50 people, Lord. And that's what I wanted. And it wasn't going well, but I remember walking out the doors and God just saying, listen, I'm in control. I've got this. And I had this overwhelming peace because of God's truth, that ultimately this ministry wasn't mine. I noticed that me getting filled with worry and anxiety was a sign that I was placing more of my identity as the leader of this ministry, worried about the success and saying that it's going to equate to my good, to my name, to my fame, as opposed to in him. I wasn't placing my identity in him. And listen, it didn't mean that I should just be complacent because I'm just going to trust God with the results. What it meant was that Not only trusting in the power of prayer, but also trusting in the power of perspiration. I think there's too many people, godly Christian people, that say, I'm just going to pray and ask God to do something about it, but yet we're not willing to get off the couch and actually get to work, to talk to our roommate, to talk to our friend, to go and actually minister to people. Somebody over there is about to clap. I feel you can shout. I don't care. We can do it. We have this, I believe that we should work hard, but what it did mean is that, one, my identity is in him, and I'm called to seek after him. And then secondly, my responsibility is to my family. And then after that, it's to do whatever I can to make this ministry work. But I just needed to trust him with the results. For me, I bought into this lie that my identity was found in what I did. It was a lie, what I could accomplish, as opposed to my identity being what Christ did in me already and what he accomplished for me on the cross. I want to ask you, what lie are you buying into? You can write that down. Some of you, maybe you're buying into this idea that a certain body image is necessary to be beautiful. Maybe some of you are buying into the idea that if you're not dating someone or you're not talking to someone, somehow you're just unlovable. Others, you've bought into the idea that an A in that class is more important than your walk with Christ. For some, you've bought into the idea that who your friends say you are and who your family says you are is more important than who God says you are. Others, you've bought into the lie that the people around you will just know that you're a Christian by the way you act, so you don't actually need to open up your mouth and talk to them about Jesus. And then for some, you've bought into the idea that if you don't get into that program, that nursing program or that grad school, that somehow you've fallen short of what God expects of you and he somehow loves you less. Instead of that, I want you to focus on what is true, whatever your lie is. Instead, focus on what is true. What is true? Well, the truth is that you're a child of God, that you were created in his image, that nothing you can do can separate you from his love, and nothing you can do can earn you any more of it. His grace is sufficient and his mercy is new every morning. You don't have to fight for victory because the victory has already been won in Christ Jesus, and that's the truth. Third point is this: learn from godly examples. This seems a little arrogant if you look at it in one perspective, but Paul is basically saying in verse 9, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Paul is basically encouraging the Philippian church to look to the way he lived and handled anxiety in his life and then mirror it. And for me, a lot of times as a pastor, I feel guilty about teaching how to handle certain situations or instructing people on how to live a life of godliness, when inside myself, I know that really I need to apply a lot of the very things that I'm talking to you about. Just like when it comes to anxiety, I know there's some things that I'm speaking tonight that I need to more truly and fully buy into. Many of us have this do as I say, not as I do mentality. But for Paul, he was so confident in the way he was living that he didn't mind that people looked to him for practical tips on how to live. Understand that Paul, who was driven out of numerous cities for sharing the gospel, who was beaten, who was arrested multiple times and spent a large portion of his life in prison, he handled anxiety well, to the point where he's saying, listen, just look at how I did it. For those of you who are in a season of stress or a season of anxiety, does your life reflect the life of someone who others should look to in regards to handling stress, to worry, and anxiety? And perhaps the answer, like me at times, is there's no way. No way I would want certain people to look to me in regards to the way I handle worry, stress, anxiety, and depression. Well, for you, I don't want you to beat yourself up over it, but do look into the lives of others who in your eyes are handling the stress and worries that life throws their way well. Look, there's some of you that the people that you're surrounding yourself with, they're vampires. They're sucking the life out of you. And instead of surrounding yourself who are bringing stress and worry and anxiety into your world, find people that are speaking life into you. So that way when you deal with anxiety, you're not having to rely on the people that are bringing anxiety and worry and stress and depression into you. You can find people that are godly examples, that are really great examples of what it means to plow through hard times with a perspective that ultimately God is in control, that he is good. The last point is joy is buoyancy. That's a weird word. B-U-O-Y. That's how it's spelled. I didn't know that. It's not B-O-Y, in case some of you were wondering. But joy is buoyancy. And if you're just trying to give this illustration, we talked about fishing earlier, so we might as well stick with it. If you've been fishing, you have this little buoy sometimes, and basically you have the line, and then there's like a little ball, a buoy, and then, am I saying that word weird? Buoy? It's a buoy. Stop. It's a bobber is a type of buoy. Shut your mouth. I'll punch you in the throat. Lord, forgive me for that. I I felt a level of anxiety there. I didn't handle it well. Lord. It's a buoy in this example, right? Okay. A bobber is buoyant, so therefore, it's a buoy. There we go. So imagine we got a buoy. We got a buoy, all right? And underneath the buoy, there's a fishing line, there's a hook, and we're just gonna assume that the fish never bites it, because what happens when you have a bobber, a buoy? Man, you're messing me up. You have the waves will come, and the bobber may go under for a season, crash over it, but what always happens? It always comes right back up. It always comes back up. For us in our lives, joy is buoyancy. Joy says that no matter what comes my way, it may bring me down for a season, but I will always pop back up. Ultimately, the whole point of a night like tonight is to help lead all of us into a life of joy. We talked about it in week 1. The 2 purposes by which we were created was to 1, bring glory to him, and 2, experience and live a life of joy. But in order to achieve that, we need to have a biblical understanding of joy. Because some of you would say that joy is happiness. Certainly a lot of the world would say that joy is happiness. But I'm telling you, that's not entirely accurate. We see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. I'm just going to pull a verse out of here. There's a larger context that's really good. We're just going to pull this verse out for tonight's purpose. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep. Basically about those not who are like taking a nap, those who are going to bed. We're talking about those who are dead. D-E-A-D, dead. That you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. Basically says, we don't want you to be confused about people that have died. We don't want you to grieve like the people do who have no hope. You're not called to grieve the same way that they do. Notice though, he's not saying that we're not called to grieve at all. He's saying you're not called to grieve as they do who have no hope. Grieving is a natural response to the people we love passing away. Grieving is a natural response to something negative happening into our life. Having a moment of sorrow, of sadness, of grief, that's not a lack of joy. The difference is that the way someone with joy grieves is very different than those who have no hope. Because we have hope in the resurrecting power of Jesus, we don't have to mourn in the same way. We mourn for us when someone passes away, not for them. When something bad happens, it doesn't mean that you aren't sad about it or don't get frustrated. It just means that your sadness has perspective. Buoyancy has perspective. Joy has perspective. And that perspective is found in the idea that God is in control and that everything on this side of death is temporary anyways. We see in Psalm chapter 4, verse 7, that David says, you have put more joy in my heart. He's talking to God. You have put more joy in my heart, God, than they have when their grain and their wine abound. What is he saying? David is saying, God, listen, my life can stink sometimes, but even when their life is good, I still have way more joy than they have. Why? Because I have perspective. Because I know that you love me. He's buying into the truth. And the truth is that God is for you. And if he is for you, then who can be against you? Now, all this sounds really good. It sounds really preachy. It's kind of teachy. Some of you are like, I feel like I've been in a class. And you're like, but what do I do? Where do I go from here? Because a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing is not really that new. Give me something practical that I can apply to my life. So I want to do that. I left a little space at the bottom to kind of help us out with this as we begin to go. The first thing is this. I want you to adjust your expectations. It's not going to be on the screen. Adjust your expectations. C.S. Lewis has this quote that says, expectations or anything. I want to use an analogy. Imagine someone blindfolds you and you walk into a place and they say, listen, what you're about to walk into and enter into is a honeymoon suite. It's a honeymoon suite that rivals the most exquisite, extravagant honeymoon suites in all of Las Vegas. The most beautiful honeymoon suite you've ever laid eyes on. And then what happens is they take off the blindfold and you open your eyes to a Motel 6 double room, right? You got the corner tub. It's got a little hair in it, right? A little mildew. It's gross, right? The bed's not made. It's just, it's kind of like, and you're like, dude, what have you brought me to? Okay, now imagine they put the blindfold on and they say, listen, here's what we're doing. I'm going to walk you into a prison cell. We're going to a prison cell and it's going to stink. It's going to be dirty. There's going to be a toilet there. This toilet seat's going to be cut in half. There's going to be stuff in it. And then there's going to be like, you're going to have a bunkmate and he's going to be like, hey, Jimbo, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have a prison cell. That's where we're going. And they get into the room and he takes off the blindfold. And what do you see? You see a Motel 6 double room. What are you thinking? Oh, praise the Lord. This room is awesome, right? What's the difference? It's the same stinking room. The difference is expectations. Our difference is perspective. Another illustration to bring this a little bit further. Imagine we're at the ECU game this past Saturday. Come on, let's get excited about something. It was awesome. It was awesome. NC State, man, they need the gospel too, but I'm really glad that they're not here right now. Just kidding. We'll edit that out too. Imagine we're at the game, and a lot of you sit in the boneyard, and some of you, I know there's like a huge group of few students that sit like right on the goal line, kind of right above where the NC State players or any visiting team goes into their locker room, right? And what happens? Every time they walk out or they go in, students are like screaming, booing, yelling at them, obscenities, horrible things, not Christ-honoring things, but people are just like, that's normal, that's expected. What happens? A ref blows a call, and what does everybody do? Bull stuff, bull. That's what they say, right? That's what I thought that was right. Anyways, they're just yelling at the officials. Understand that if you took the same group of people booing and yelling obscenities at the people on the field, and you take the people in the stands, the very players and refs, and you put them out in the parking lot, and the same thing was going on where people were booing and yelling obscenities at them, it's a different scenario. Things aren't going to go as well for the people that were in the stands. There's going to be conflict. Why? Expectations. Somehow it's expected in Dowdy-Ficklin, but out in the parking lot, it's not okay. If you leave this room expecting that everything is going to be perfect all the time, that you aren't going to get sick, that the people you know aren't going to pass away, that your friends are always going to wash their dishes, that ultimately you're going to be let down. However, if you leave this room with the understanding that because we are living in a sinful, broken world, that people are going to get sick, that people will die, that friends are going to let you down, and that classes are going to be overwhelming at times, then truthfully, because of your expectations, it's going to be far easier to find joy in the midst of it. So adjust your expectations. Secondly, it's probably one of the most important things I can emphasize is that we need to understand who the enemy is. Practically speaking, I'll be really quick. We have three enemies. A lot of times the church culture will say that the devil's our enemy, right? And that's all we talk about. But we have three enemies. It's the world, the flesh, and the devil. Because I know a lot of you aren't really church people. You don't really like the church lingo. Let me explain what we mean by the world, the flesh, and the devil. The world is basically this mindset. This is this secularism. In case you're wondering, the word secular just means now. This idea that says that the here and now is all that matters. Media, TV, commercials, they all cause us to buy into the idea that we need to have certain things or look a certain way, or they tell us that certain things are the cultural norms, certain things are accepted, and because it's certain things that are normal, that's what we should all believe in. That's what we should all agree in and agree on. That's what the world does. The flesh is this selfish part of us. And with every single one of us, this idea that we all want to be kind of our own God. We all want to call our own shots. We want to live for our own glory. We want to live for selfishness because really, ultimately, life is short and we should live it up. We only get one shot at it. Shouldn't we be able to do what we want? That's what the flesh says. And then there is the devil. The devil is a supernatural leader of the world of darkness, orchestrator of demons, who do a very real work in the world. And while we're not going to get into the depths of that, and some of you are like freaked out by that, it's important that we understand that the devil is a very real enemy. The point of all three, the world, the flesh, and the devil, is to destroy our peace and fill it with anxiety, to take away our joy and fill it with depression. The primary way that they come after us typically is by attacking our assurance of salvation, our knowledge of the fact that God is for us, that he died for us, and they destroy our perspective. And we so often just forget at how small we are and really how small the trials we face are in the grand scheme of things. The third and the final thought is this. Don't think that depression is a sign of weakness. There are a lot of you in this room that deal with depression. The number one drug on the market right now is an antidepressant. The second one is acid reflux. Ironic that acid reflux is primarily caused in most people by stress, by increased levels of anxiety. I want to make it very clear that if you are taking medicine for that, I am in no way saying that you shouldn't be on it. I do believe that the brain is an organ. I believe that God has gifted men and women with the knowledge to be able to create medicine, to create drugs, to treat an organ, just the way he's gifted men and women with the knowledge to be able to create medicine and drugs to fight diseases like cancer, like diabetes. I believe the brain is an organ. So it's great. I want to let you know that feeling those ways, feeling with anxiety, feeling depression is not a weakness. But I also want to say this to all of you in this room. Whether your level of anxiety is just kind of passive, or whether you've been like me where you've wanted to ball up in a corner, maybe it's gotten to the point where you've wanted to hurt yourself or even tried to hurt yourself. I want to let all of you know that if you're at a point of anxiety, depression, worry, and fear, where you haven't just laid it all out on the line to Jesus, that's where you need to begin. I'm not telling you to stop seeing a counselor. I'm definitely not telling you to stop taking medicine. I'm just telling you to start doing that. One of the things I like to do with students, if they come to me and they're seeking counsel and they're feeling lost, they're feeling broken, is I like just to stop them and I tell them, I want you just to pray out loud to God. And I want you to be real. I want you to remove the filter and just be vulnerable with Him. And afterwards, I'll ask them, I say, have you ever prayed like that before? And they're always crying, snot dripping down their face. It's always a beautiful thing, a picture of humility. And 9 times out of 10, they say, no, I've never even really prayed like this. I've never been real with Him. Because if you're dealing with that, I want you to know that that is the place to start. The place to start is to recognize that ultimately, that God is able and willing to help us and meet us in our greatest time of need. And there's going to be times in our lives where He doesn't answer our prayers the way He wants us to. There are situations going on right now within many of your lives that I'm aware of, in my life that many of you aren't aware of, where we're just like, God, why aren't you taking this away? And in those forms, what I love about the section in Philippians 4 is that He doesn't always answer the prayer the way we want to, but He promises to give us a peace that surrounds it. And I can tell you, I'd rather have a peace from God than the comfort of a life away from Him any day. Let's pray. God, we thank you, Lord, for this time.